My name is Martha, and for 47 years I have been the keeper of my family's traditions. My domain is a modest but well-loved two-story colonial in a quiet Ohio suburb, the kind of house with shutters that need a fresh coat of paint and a porch swing that groans with the weight of memories. It's the house where I raised my son David, and where my late husband Bill and I hosted every major holiday until he passed 5 years ago. Since then, the traditions have continued, but the joy has been slowly, methodically leached out of them, replaced by a sense of obligation that has started to feel less like love and more like a life sentence. It always started the same way. The first week of November, my phone would ring. It was never a casual chat. It was what I had come to call the annual summons. This year was no different. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for a simple loaf of bread, my hands dusted with flour, the scent of yeast filling the warm air. The phone buzzed on the granite countertop, the screen flashing a picture of David, his wife Susan, and their 2 teenagers, Chloe and Jason, all wearing matching sweaters from a Christmas photo 2 years prior. I wiped my hands on my apron, a floral one Bill had given me ages ago, and answered with a warmth I no longer truly felt. "David, sweetheart, how are you?" I asked, my voice practiced in its cheerfulness. "Hi, Mom," he said, his tone brisk and businesslike. He was a project manager for a large construction firm, and he managed his family life with the same clipped efficiency. "Listen, I've got Susan on the line too. We're just finalizing the Thanksgiving plans and wanted to lock things down with you." Susan's voice chirped in. "Hi, Martha. Hope we're not catching you at a bad time." The subtext was clear. Even if we are, this is happening now. I leaned against the counter, looking out the window at the rust-colored leaves skittering across my lawn. No, it's a fine time. What did you have in mind this year?" I asked, knowing full well what they had in mind. It was the same thing they had in mind every year. A long pause followed, filled with the faint rustle of what I imagined was a checklist. "Well," David began, clearing his throat, "we've decided it's just easiest if everyone comes to you again. Our house is still a mess with the half-finished basement renovation, and honestly, no one does Thanksgiving like you do." It was a compliment-coated inconvenience, a familiar tactic. It used to make me puff up with pride. Now it just made me feel tired. "The whole family will be there," Susan added. "My sister Carol and her family are driving in, so we'll be about 15 in total this year. A full house. Isn't that wonderful?" Wonderful. A word that once meant awe-inspiring was now a synonym for 15 sets of dishes, a mountain of laundry, and 3 days of non-stop cooking. My old recipe book, its spine cracked and pages stained with vanilla and grease, sat on the counter next to my bread dough. It felt less like a collection of beloved recipes and more like a book of spells for summoning exhaustion. I looked at my hands, the knuckles swollen with a touch of arthritis, the skin thin and papery. These hands had stuffed dozens of turkeys, peeled hundreds of pounds of potatoes, and rolled out miles of pie crust. They were tired, but I knew what was expected of me. So I took a deep breath, the scent of yeast and obligation filling my lungs, and said the words they were waiting to hear. "Of course. The more the merrier. My house is always open." The relief in their voices was audible, a synchronized exhale of responsibility successfully offloaded. The rest of the call was a blur of logistics, a one-sided conversation where my role was simply to listen and agree. As I hung up, the silence of my kitchen returned, but it was heavier now, filled with the phantom clang of pots and pans and the ghost of conversations I wouldn't be a part of because I'd be too busy basting a turkey. I looked at my bread dough, which had been rising so hopefully on the counter. With a sigh, I punched it down, feeling the air rush out of it, a perfect metaphor for how I felt. A week later, we had the follow-up call, the menu finalization, as David called it, with the same gravitas he might use for a multi-million-dollar contract negotiation. I was in my living room this time, settled into Bill's old armchair, a worn leather behemoth that had molded to the shape of his body and now offered me a semblance of his quiet strength. A cup of chamomile tea steamed on the side table, my small attempt to fortify myself. "Okay, Mom," David started, the familiar sound of keyboard clicks in the background. "I've put together a spreadsheet." "A spreadsheet? For Thanksgiving dinner?" I took a slow sip of my tea, the hot liquid doing little to warm the chill that was creeping into my bones. Susan and I have polled the family, and we have the final requests. Are you ready? I didn't need to be ready. I knew the list by heart. It was a culinary marathon, a testament to my family's complete and utter disregard for the fact that I was a 72-year-old woman, not a catering company. I'm listening, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. He began to list the items, each one a nail in the coffin of my holiday weekend. Okay, so for the main, we need the 22-pound free-range organic turkey, of course, with your sausage and cornbread stuffing, and a separate batch of gluten-free stuffing for Carol's husband. Then, the honey-glazed ham with the pineapple rings, for sides. He rattled them off like an auctioneer. Mashed potatoes, the creamy kind, with the garlic and chives. Candied yams with the marshmallow topping. Green bean casserole, but the one from scratch, not with the canned soup. Roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon. Macaroni and cheese, the baked kind with the breadcrumb crust, for the kids. And your cranberry sauce, the one with the orange zest and port wine. He paused for a breath. I pictured the mountain of groceries, the hours of chopping, stirring, and simmering. But he wasn't done. And for dessert, we'll need your famous pumpkin pie, a pecan pie for me, and an apple crumble for Susan. Chloe wants a chocolate silk pie this year, too. A fourth pie. My baking hand twinged in protest. The list was a monument to their thoughtlessness. It wasn't a meal. It was a performance, a command performance where I was the sole, unpaid cast member. So that's about it, David concluded, a tone of smug satisfaction in his voice. A nice traditional 12-course spread. Simple, really. Simple. I almost choked on my tea. The silence stretched on as I tried to find my voice. I wanted to scream, to tell them how their simple request was a 3-day ordeal of back-breaking labor. I wanted to ask if they knew that the skin on my fingers often cracked from all the washing and peeling. But I said nothing. It was Susan who spoke next, her voice dripping with a cloying sweetness that set my teeth on edge. It all sounds so delicious, Martha. We're so excited. She paused, and then delivered the line that would change everything. Just one little thing, she giggled, a sound like tiny shards of glass. David and I were talking, and we just want to make sure everything is perfect this year. So if you could be extra careful, and try not to burn anything this time. Not to burn anything this time. The words hung in the air, echoing in the quiet room. She was referring to the Thanksgiving 2 years ago, when the corner of the pecan pie, my fourth dessert of the day, had gotten a little too dark while I was trying to simultaneously carve the turkey, mash the potatoes, and locate a serving spoon for Susan's sister. It was a minor imperfection, a battle scar from a culinary war, but they had turned it into a family joke. A joke at my expense. My entire being went still. The warmth of Bill's chair, the comfort of the tea, it all vanished. I felt a hot, bright flash of rage, something I hadn't felt in years. It was so pure, so potent. It almost took my breath away. They didn't see me. They didn't see a mother or a grandmother. They saw an aging, unreliable appliance. A stove that might be on the fritz. A cook who needed to be managed. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The years of quiet resentment, of biting my tongue and forcing a smile, they all coalesced into a single sharp point of clarity. They had finally added the last ingredient to their perfect Thanksgiving meal. My fury. Don't you worry, I said, my voice eerily calm. I'll make sure everything is taken care of. I won't burn a thing. The call ended with their cheerful goodbyes, oblivious to the earthquake they had just triggered. I sat in the darkness of the living room long after, the phone silent in my lap, the spreadsheet of their demands burning a hole in my mind. The next morning, the rage had cooled into a hard, clear resolution. I woke up not with the usual sense of dread that preceded a holiday cooking marathon, but with a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. I went to my little office, a small room overlooking the backyard, and sat at my antique writing desk. As per David's instructions, I began to create the grocery list. But this time, it wasn't just a list. It was an itemized invoice for my own exploitation. I wrote it all down, meticulously. 22-pound organic free-range turkey, $130. Spiral-cut honey-glazed ham, $75. Pecans for the pie, $18 for a small bag. Port wine for the cranberry sauce, the good kind, they always noticed, $25. On and on it went. I listed every herb, every stick of butter, every cup of flour. I factored in the cost of heavy cream, artisan bread for the stuffing, gourmet cheese for the macaroni, Brussels sprouts, bacon, yams, marshmallows. The list grew, sprawling across 2 full pages of my notepad. When I was done with the food, I added a miscellaneous section, roasting pans because my largest one was starting to warp, a new meat thermometer because Susan had complained the turkey was a little dry last year, heavy-duty foil, parchment paper, fancy paper napkins because Chloe was so over the cloth ones. When I was finally finished, I pulled out my calculator and began to add it all up. My breath caught in my throat as I tallied the final number. $742. $742 for a single meal that I was not only expected to procure and prepare, but for which I was also preemptively criticized. I leaned back in my chair, the notepad in my hand, and stared at that number. It represented so much more than money. It was the price of their expectations, the cost of my servitude. For a moment, a wave of despair washed over me. I felt trapped, a prisoner in my own home, bound by the chains of tradition and guilt. I looked around the room, at the photos on the wall. David as a little boy, beaming on his first bicycle. Bill and I on our wedding day, young and full of foolish, beautiful dreams. A photo of my own mother, a formidable woman who would never have stood for such nonsense. My gaze fell upon my tablet, sitting on the corner of the desk. I picked it up, intending to look up a coupon for a turkey, a pathetic ingrained habit of thriftiness. As the screen lit up, an advertisement popped up. It was an algorithm's lucky guess, or perhaps a sign from the universe. A banner ad for a last-minute travel deal. Escape the cold. All-inclusive resorts in Cabo San Lucas, starting at $899 for 5 nights. The image showed a woman, about my age, with silver hair and a wide smile, lounging on a beach chair. In her hand was a margarita, its glass beaded with condensation. Behind her, the ocean was a dazzling, impossible shade of blue. I stared at the picture, my heart starting to pound. Cabo, sunshine, a drink in my hand instead of a basting brush. No spreadsheet, no demands, no condescending advice from my daughter-in-law. Just sun, sand, and blissful, unapologetic silence. An idea, wild and audacious, began to form in my mind. It was a fantasy, a fleeting daydream. But then I looked down at the grocery list in my hand. $742. And then I looked back at the ad. $899. The numbers weren't that far apart. One was the cost of my family's Thanksgiving. The other was the cost of my freedom. I thought about Susan's voice, that little giggle as she told me not to burn anything. The daydream began to solidify, to take shape, to feel not just possible, but necessary. It was a rebellion, a declaration of independence. I picked up my pen and, right next to the $742 total on my notepad, I drew a big, fat star. This wasn't a grocery budget anymore. It was a travel fund. A grin spread across my face, the first genuine, joyful smile I'd had in weeks. They wanted a perfect Thanksgiving. Well, I was about to give myself one. The plan, once it took root, grew with astonishing speed. Fear and guilt tried to surface, whispering doubts in my ear as I lay in bed that night. What will they do? They'll be so angry. You're abandoning your family. But then I'd hear Susan's little laugh, and the whispers would be silenced by a fresh surge of righteous indignation. The next day, I called David. I kept my voice steady, playing the part of the dutiful matriarch. David, honey, I've got the grocery list all figured out. It's quite a bit this year, with the extra guests and all the special requests. I let that hang in the air. Oh, right, he said, distracted. I could hear him typing. Well, whatever it is, just let me know the total and I'll transfer it over. It comes to about $800 to be safe, I said, rounding up slightly. There might be taxes on my freedom after all. 800? He whistled. Wow. Okay. Well, it is what it is. I'll send it to your account now. Just make sure you get the good stuff, Mom. Especially the ham. Don't worry, I said, a smile playing on my lips. I'll get the absolute best. A few minutes later, my phone pinged with a notification from my banking app. Deposit received, $800. Memo, Thanksgiving feast. I looked at the screen, and the feeling was electric. It was real. This was happening. The following morning, I put on my good coat and drove to the bank. Not to the drive-thru, but inside. I wanted this to be a formal transaction, a ceremony. I walked up to a young teller named Brenda, whose name tag was adorned with a sparkly cat sticker. I slid my debit card and a withdrawal slip across the counter. "Good morning, Martha," she said with a smile. "Just a deposit today?" "Actually, Brenda," I said, feeling a thrill of conspiracy. "I'd like to make a withdrawal. $800, in cash." Her eyebrows shot up. "800? In cash? Everything okay?" It was a fair question. I was a woman who typically dealt in checks and debit card swipes for groceries. This was unusual. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "Everything is wonderful. I'm just feeling a little old-fashioned today. And I'd like it in 50s and 20s, if you don't mind." She gave me a curious look but complied, turning to her cash drawer. As she counted out the crisp bills, I felt a tremor of nerves. This was the point of no return. This was tangible. The money wasn't just a number on a screen anymore. It was a physical stack of currency that represented my ticket out. She pushed the neat stack of bills toward me. I carefully placed them in my purse, the leather cool against the warm paper. "Have a wonderful day, Martha," Brenda said. "You too, Brenda," I replied, a genuine warmth in my voice. "You too." Back home, with the cash safely tucked away, I opened my tablet. My hands were shaking slightly, but my resolve was firm. I went back to the travel website, my heart thumping a steady rhythm of defiance against my ribs. I found the Cabo deal again. 5 nights at the Villa del Sol Resort, all-inclusive, flight leaving from Cleveland on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. It was perfect. I clicked through the booking process, entering my details. Martha Jensen, age 72, emergency contact. I paused. It should be David, but I couldn't. I typed in the name and number of my neighbor and good friend, Eleanor, a fellow widow with a wicked sense of humor who would understand completely. I got to the payment screen. It asked for a credit card. For a second, I faltered. A credit card was traceable, immediate, but I had my cash. The plan had to be pure. I chose the pay with a travel agent option and found a local agency. An hour later, I was sitting across from a young woman named Sarah, the stack of cash on the desk between us. I explained I wanted to book the Cabo trip I'd found online. "It's a surprise for myself," I said, the words feeling delicious and true. Sarah was wonderfully efficient, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Flight and hotel confirmed, Miss Jensen. You're all set for paradise." She handed me a folder with my itinerary and tickets. Walking out of that travel agency, clutching the folder, I felt 10 feet tall. The November air was cold and gray, but I didn't feel it. I was walking on sunshine. The next few days were a master class in deception. I operated with the covert skill of a Cold War spy, all while maintaining the placid exterior of a grandmother preparing for a family feast. Whenever David or Susan called to check in, a euphemism for micromanage, I was ready with a plausible update. "How's the prep going, Mom?" David asked on Sunday night. "Oh, just wonderfully," I chirped, while secretly researching the best waterproof sunscreens. "I've cleared out the pantry and made space in the freezer. I'll do the big shop on Tuesday." This was the cornerstone of my alibi. Tuesday was my designated grocery day, the day I would vanish. The night before my departure, I went through the motions. I laid out my largest roasting pan on the kitchen counter. I pulled out the special serving platters from the high cupboard. I even left my recipe book open to the page for sausage and cornbread stuffing. It was a perfectly staged crime scene, the scene of a Thanksgiving dinner that would never be. The real work was happening upstairs in my bedroom. I packed my suitcase with a giddy sense of rebellion, trading my drab November cardigans and slacks for things I hadn't worn in years. A breezy floral sundress, a wide-brimmed straw hat, 2 swimsuits, one of which was a rather daring one-piece I'd bought on a whim and never had the courage to wear. I packed a thick novel I'd been meaning to read, my sunglasses, and a small bottle of aloe vera gel, just in case. It felt like I was packing for a new life. Tuesday morning arrived, gray and damp, a typical Ohio late autumn day. I woke early, my stomach a flutter of nerves and excitement. At 9 a.m., my pre-booked taxi was due. At 8:45, I sent a text to David. "Morning, sweetheart. Just heading out for the big grocery run now. It's going to take a while. Wish me luck. Love, Mom." The three little dots that indicated he was typing appeared almost instantly. A reply came back. "Good luck. Get the good ham. And don't forget the marshmallows for the yams," Susan says. I smiled and typed back a final, simple message. "Will do." Then, I turned my phone completely off. Not on silent, off. The silence was profound. It was the sound of a cord being cut. A few minutes later, a yellow taxi pulled up to my curb. The driver, a kind man with a gentle face, helped me with my single, surprisingly light suitcase. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back at my house. It looked so quiet, so unassuming, with the recipe book on the counter and the roasting pan glinting in the faint morning light. It looked like a house where a grandmother was about to embark on a marathon of cooking. I settled back into the seat of the taxi, a grin spreading across my face. The driver caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Headed somewhere warm, I hope?" he asked, noticing my smile. "The warmest," I said, my voice full of joy. "I'm flying to Mexico." As the taxi turned the corner, leaving my quiet street behind, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for years. It was the weight of expectation, of tradition, of being taken for granted, and for the first time in a very long time, I was flying. Stepping off the plane at Los Cabos International Airport was a sensory awakening. The air, thick with humidity and the sweet foreign scent of tropical flowers and jet fuel, wrapped around me like a warm blanket. It was a stark, glorious contrast to the biting Ohio wind I had left behind just a few hours earlier. The sun was a brilliant, tangible force, warming my skin and making me squint with pleasure. My prearranged shuttle was waiting, a driver holding a sign that read, "Jensen." Being escorted to a cool, air-conditioned van felt impossibly luxurious. As we drove, I was mesmerized by the landscape. The desert terrain, with its rugged mountains and towering cacti, crashed right into the brilliant turquoise of the Sea of Cortez. It was a world away from the muted greens and browns of my suburban neighborhood. The Villa del Sol resort was even more beautiful than the pictures online. An open-air lobby with a soaring thatched roof greeted me, along with a smiling woman who handed me a flute of champagne. "Welcome to paradise, Señora Jensen," she said. My room was on the 3rd floor, with a private balcony that overlooked the main pool, and beyond it, the endless, sparkling ocean. I stepped out onto the balcony, gripping the railing, and just breathed. The air smelled of salt and sunscreen. The sound was a symphony of gentle waves, distant mariachi music from the pool bar, and the happy shrieks of children splashing in the water. It was the sound of other people's joy, and for once, I wasn't responsible for creating any of it. I could simply be a part of it. After unpacking my few things, I changed into my swimsuit, the daring one, and a floral cover-up. I walked down to the pool bar, my bare feet padding on the warm stone tiles. I took a seat on a stool that overlooked the beach, feeling a delicious sense of anonymity. No one knew me here. I wasn't a mother or a grandmother. I was just a woman on vacation. The bartender, a handsome young man named Marco, approached with a grin. "Hola, señora, what can I get for you?" I looked at the menu of colorful drinks. "I would like a classic margarita on the rocks, with salt," I said, the words feeling like a line from a movie. "A strong one." "You got it," he said with a wink. When he placed the drink in front of me, it was a work of art. A large, heavy glass beaded with cold sweat, a perfect rim of salt, a wedge of lime perched on the edge. I took the first sip. The sharp tang of lime, the bite of tequila, the hint of sweetness. It was the taste of liberation. It was cold and strong and perfect. I raised my glass in a silent toast to myself, to the 72-year-old woman who had finally learned to put herself first. I thought, with a pang of pure, unadulterated glee, of my family back in Ohio. Right now, they would be assuming I was wrestling a giant, half-frozen turkey out of a grocery cart. They would be blissfully unaware that instead of pushing a cart under the harsh fluorescent lights of a supermarket, I was sitting on a bar stool in heaven, getting pleasantly tipsy. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a lounge chair by the water's edge, my hat tilted down to shade my face, my novel unopened on my lap. I didn't want to read. I just wanted to watch the waves roll in and out, a steady, hypnotic rhythm that washed away every last bit of resentment and obligation. I had done it. I had taken their grocery money and flown to Mexico. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink, I felt no guilt, not a single drop. All I felt was peace. Thanksgiving morning in Cabo was, in a word, perfect. I woke not to the jarring blare of a 5 a.m. alarm set for turkey duty, but to the gentle sound of waves and the soft light of the Mexican sun filtering through my balcony doors. I made myself a cup of coffee from the little machine in my room and sat on the balcony, wrapped in a plush hotel robe, watching the world come alive. There was no schedule, no checklist, no spreadsheet. My only plan for the day was to move from my room to the beach and then perhaps to the pool, with intermittent stops for food and drink that someone else would prepare and serve. Down on the beach, I found a perfect spot under a palapa, a thatched roof umbrella that offered a lovely patch of shade. I laid out my towel, slathered myself in sunscreen, and settled in. It was about 10 a.m. here, which meant it was noon back in Ohio. The chaos would be reaching its peak. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a moment to imagine the scene at David and Susan's house, which is where they would have all convened once they realized I wasn't at my place. I pictured the frantic phone calls that had surely started late Tuesday and escalated into full-blown panic by Wednesday. I saw them all gathered in Susan's pristine, all-white kitchen, a space utterly unequipped for the culinary onslaught they had demanded. David would be pacing, red-faced, barking orders into his phone, trying to project manage the disaster. Susan would be on the verge of tears, lamenting the lack of a proper roasting pan, and blaming David for not handling me better. My granddaughter Chloe would be dramatically sighing about how this was the worst Thanksgiving ever, while my grandson Jason was probably trying to order a pizza. I imagined Susan's sister Carol smugly pointing out that her gluten-free husband would now have nothing to eat. There would be finger-pointing, accusations, and a frantic last-ditch effort to salvage the day with overpriced, pre-cooked turkey from a gourmet market, which would inevitably be dry and disappointing. The thought filled me not with malice, but with a deep, satisfying sense of justice. They had created this mess with their entitlement and their condescension. Now they were simmering in it. Around 1 p.m., a waiter came by my palapa. "Señora, can I get you something? A drink? Some lunch?" "Yes," I said, smiling up at him. "I'll have the fish tacos and another margarita, please." As I waited for my perfect Thanksgiving lunch, I allowed myself one small indulgence. I retrieved my phone from my beach bag and, for the first time in 2 days, turned it on. It sputtered to life, vibrating violently as a torrent of notifications flooded in. 97 missed calls, 152 text messages, 23 voicemails. I scrolled through the text previews, a chronological record of their meltdown. Tuesday, 1:15 p.m. David. "Mom, where are you? Grocery store said you haven't been there." Tuesday, 8 p.m. Susan. "Martha, this isn't funny. Please call us." Wednesday, 9:30 a.m. David. "I swear to God, Mom, if this is some kind of joke." Wednesday, 4 p.m. Chloe. "Grandma, are you okay? My mom is crying." Thursday, 11 a.m. David. "We know you're alive because your neighbor Eleanor said she spoke to you. Where are you?" I laughed out loud, a real hearty laugh that drew a curious glance from the couple under the next palapa. Eleanor, of course. I had asked her to just confirm I was safe and sound if they called and to say nothing more. She had played her part beautifully. The sheer panic, the righteous anger, the manipulated concern for my granddaughter, it was all there. It was the most satisfying thing I had read in years. My fish tacos arrived, fresh and delicious. I took a bite, savoring the taste. Then, with a deep sense of satisfaction, I turned the phone off again and dropped it back into my bag. Let them wonder. Let them panic. Let them eat burnt store-bought pie. I was having my own Thanksgiving feast, and it was the best one I'd ever had. Returning to Ohio 5 days later was like stepping back into a black and white film after living in vibrant Technicolor. The sky was a blanket of solid gray, and a bitter wind whipped at my face as I stepped out of the taxi. But this time, the cold didn't bother me. I felt fortified, warmed from the inside out by the Mexican sun, and a newfound sense of self-respect. My house was just as I had left it, a silent, staged tableau of an abandoned holiday. The first thing I did was walk into the kitchen, pick up the dusty recipe book, and close it. Then I put the roasting pan back in the cupboard. My sanctuary was restored. I knew the confrontation was coming, so I decided to face it on my own terms. I turned on my phone, and instead of cowering from the onslaught, I went straight to the voicemails. I made a cup of tea, sat in Bill's armchair, and pressed play. The first few messages were frantic with worry, which quickly curdled into frustration. By Wednesday, the tone had shifted entirely. David's voice was tight with fury. "Mom, this is insane! You have completely, utterly ruined Thanksgiving for 15 people. 15! Do you have any idea how selfish that is? Call me back, now!" Then came Susan's message, her voice trembling with theatrical rage. "Martha, I cannot believe you. To be so manipulative and cruel, and after we trusted you, after we gave you $800, this is theft. We are all just devastated by your betrayal." Betrayal, theft. The words were so absurd I almost laughed. They weren't devastated by my absence. They were furious about their inconvenience. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were enraged that their demands hadn't been met. I listened to all 23 messages, each one stripping away another layer of their manufactured concern, revealing the raw, ugly entitlement beneath. When I was done, I felt nothing but a calm, quiet certainty. I had done the right thing. An hour later, my phone rang. It was David. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, David." "Where have you been?" he roared. No preamble, no greeting. "I was on vacation," I said, my voice even and calm. "Vacation? You were supposed to be cooking Thanksgiving dinner. We gave you the money. We had family fly-in. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking," I said, my voice gaining strength with every word, "that I am a 72-year-old woman, not your personal chef. I was thinking that for years, I have hosted every holiday, done all the work, and received nothing but escalating demands in return. And I was thinking that when my daughter-in-law had the nerve to tell me not to burn anything, as if I were a dim-witted employee, I had finally had enough." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I don't think he had ever heard me speak this way. "Susan didn't mean it like that," he stammered, his anger deflating into weak justification. "It doesn't matter how she meant it, David. It's how I received it. It was the final straw. You don't get to treat me like a servant and then get angry when the servant walks off the job." He tried to argue, to talk about tradition, about family, about the money. I let him talk, but I didn't engage. When he finally wound down, I laid out the new terms. "From now on, things are going to be different," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. "I will no longer be hosting every holiday. If you want to have a big family Thanksgiving, you are welcome to host it at your own house. You can plan the menu, do the shopping, the cooking, and the cleaning. I will be a guest. I might bring a dish if I'm feeling up to it. Or I might not. My presence will be my present." "And the money?" he asked, his voice small. "Consider it my severance pay," I said, "for 47 years of unpaid service." I ended the call before he could respond. I sat there in the quiet of my living room, the house feeling more like mine than it had in years. The future was uncertain. Maybe they would come around, maybe they wouldn't. But for the first time, I realized I didn't care. My happiness was no longer contingent on their approval. Later that week, a travel brochure arrived in the mail. Springtime in Tuscany. I left it on the coffee table, right where everyone could see it.